Well, good morning, everybody. It's Thursday, and welcome to the Vicarage here at Penn, and welcome to our Bible talk for this morning. Couple of things briefly. Firstly, don't forget the spring clean day has been changed. It's now the Saturday, the 5th of March. So do come along in your old clothes that day, and let's really blitz the church. That's Saturday, 5th of March, because that's a change of dates, so 5th of March. The other thing, I went to check out the new heating project yesterday, and it's coming on nicely. And what you probably don't know, if you've been attending St. Bart's, is that even when the church was warm, the vestry, that's the place where the vicars put their robes on and so on, hasn't had any heating for years. It's been the coldest vestry in the world for years. But, you know, they're putting some heating in there at the moment. So no longer will you see a frozen vicar emerging before every service. Anyway, on the end of that frivolous note, we are in the Gospel of Matthew, and we're in chapter 8. To remind you, in chapters 5, 6 and 7, we had the famous Sermon on the Mount. Jesus comes down from the mountain, we found yesterday. He immediately encounters a leprous man and he heals him. Then he goes to a place called Capernaum, which is by the Sea of Galilee. And then he heals the centurion's servant. And that's where we are now. So without further ado, we are in Matthew 8, chapter 8, and I'm starting to read at verse 14. We're in Capernaum, remember. When Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying in bed with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and began to serve him. That evening they brought to him many who were possessed with demons, and cast out the spirit, and he cast out the spirits with a word, and cured all who were sick. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah. He took our infirmities and bore our diseases. Now when Jesus saw great crowds around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. A scribe then approached and said, "Teacher, I'll follow you wherever you go." Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of his disciples said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me, and let the dead bury their own dead." And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Challenging this morning. So, Jesus has come down from the mountain, and he heals the man with leprosy, and he goes to Capernaum, and he heals the centurion's servant. And whilst in Capernaum, he goes to Peter's house, and he heals Peter's mother-in-law. No doubt did plenty of help for peace in the Peter household, and so on. But what becomes clear straight after that is that Matthew quotes from the prophet Isaiah. Quote from chapter 53. He's borne our iniquities and our, he says he took our infirmities and bore our diseases. Quote from the Old Testament from Isaiah, all about the Messiah. And I think what Matthew is trying to get us to see here is that Jesus does some remarkable things. He's healed three very different but very desperate people, you know, a man with leprosy, a centurion's servant, and now Peter's mother-in-law. Men and women, rich and poor, both in the church and out of the church, and outsiders, so to speak. And then all sorts of people come to Jesus. But what Matthew wants us to see is that Jesus wasn't just a mighty worker. Jesus wasn't just some magician. By quoting the Old Testament there, he's saying that Jesus is so much more than that. What he wants us to see is that Jesus is the Messiah. So he wants to tell us about the miracles. He wants us to hear that they happened. He wants us to hear about the faith of the people that came to Jesus. But what Matthew wants us to see clearly by quoting this, he wants us to see that Jesus is more than just a magician. He wants us to see that Jesus is the Messiah. He wants us to see that Jesus is divine, and more of that in chapters to come. But then, as he's about to get into because the crowd starts to meet, and so Jesus says to the disciples, "Look, we need to move off." So he sends them off, and he gets approached by a couple of people. And a couple of things are interesting about this immediately. One is that one of the people who wants to follow him is a scribe. And generally speaking, scribes and that weren't very fond of Jesus. So it's interesting here that we have a scribe, a teacher of the law, who actually wants to follow Jesus. And the other interesting point from the off is that, generally speaking, if someone comes to the church and says, "We want to become part of the church," or "We want to help out with something," generally speaking, we say, "Yeah, come in, you know, we'd love to have you," and more the merrier, and quite right, I believe that. But Jesus' approach here is rather different. He seems to rather play hard to get. And in doing so, he says really some incredibly challenging things. Firstly, he says, I think he says this to the scribe, isn't it? He says, describes it, I'll follow you anywhere. And you think, wow, it doesn't come much better than that. But Jesus says, foxes have holes and birds have the nest, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. In other words, there's an implication that Jesus is actually going to be homeless. And I think that there's a couple of things for us in this, is that firstly, that reminds us that discipleship is costly. Our discipleship cost Jesus his life. Discipleship cost St. Paul, and 11 of the 12 disciples died for their faith. And for people for their faith today, people in faith in Jesus, people still live in danger. And I think we need to remember that discipleship carries with it a cost, and that it's not always an easy run. It's not simply a crutch to help us through difficult times. It's not just a feeling of knowing, good friends and whatever else. It's much more than that. That discipleship, true discipleship of Jesus, carries with it a cost. And I think Jesus wants to remind the scribe, and probably anyone else who's listening, that, following me carries with it a cost. And I think we need to hear that. He also says the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And I think this also reminds us here of what our true home is. I think as Christians, we need to remember that actually in the end, our true home is not on this earth. Our true home is in heaven. Our true home is with God. I think we tend to get very attached to the things of this life, dare I say, I think things that we can't, we brought nothing into the world and we take nothing out, as it says in the book of Job, we need to remember actually that, God is who we should be. God is our true home, and that we shouldn't get too attached to things of this life, be it possessions, be it achievements, whatever it may be, certainly be it money. We need to make sure that we remember that our true home is in heaven. There's a story, I don't know where I heard it from, about a missionary who was coming back to America after years of service in Africa or somewhere. And they found themselves coming back on the same boat as the President of the United States. And they got off the boat, there's this great big welcome home banner for the President of America. And, almost with the missionary, hardly anyone was there to meet him when he comes off the boat. And he kind of goes to God and prays about this. And God sort of says to him, well, but you're not home yet. And I think we need to remember here that as Christians, our true home actually is in heaven. And then there's this other person who comes to Jesus and he says, can I go and bury my father first? And Jesus says, let the dead bury the dead. Come and follow me. I've always wanted to say that to a funeral director. Joking aside. But actually, this is hard. And on the face of it, it sounds remarkably harsh. And to Jewish ears, where giving your father a good send-off is in a sense, it's crucial. It's really, really important. It's a huge importance in the Jewish family. So this will have sounded then outrageous, as indeed it sounds hurtful and outrageous today. I suppose, in a sense, how would you explain this? It doesn't make it clear here whether the man is imminently, whether his father has just died or whatever, or whether alternatively it might be saying, well, I'll tell you what, Jesus, when my father's gone one day, then I'll come to you. Whether he's just putting it off. Because obviously, if his father's just passed away, that does sound harsh. But often it could be, tell you what, when the kids are grown up, I'll follow you. When I get this new job, I'll follow you. When my career is doing better, I'll follow you. When I finish university, I'll follow you. When I get married, I'll follow you. When I get better, whatever it may be, I don't know. And I think sometimes people can have all manner of excuses. And actually, Jesus says, come follow me, he says. But there's always a reason why not. There's always some pressing engagement. There's always some new opportunity. There's always some reason why not now. And I think what Jesus is saying here really is, come and follow me. There will always be a reason why not to. So there's no time like the present. Come and follow me. So, like I said, if the man's father had imminently died, I do agree. That does sound very, very harsh. But on the other hand, there's some thought, and I'll go along with this, that I think what he's really saying here is, I think this guy's trying to put it off. And actually, if we put it off indefinitely, it never happens, do we? We can keep putting things off, but actually, in terms of following Jesus, there's no time like the present. Jesus says, come, follow me. And as I say, there's no time like now. So, challenging reading this morning. Firstly, the healings remind us, Matthew's reminding us that Jesus is so much more than just a magician, so much more than a mighty worker. Actually, he is the Messiah and he's divine. And that's why he quotes from the Old Testament, making it clear that Matthew thinks that Jesus is the Messiah. Secondly, foxes have holes remind us actually that discipleship carries with it a cost, and that ultimately our true home is in heaven. And this business about, let the dead bury the dead, come and follow me, I think what he's really saying is there'll always be a reason why not when it comes to following Jesus. But actually, there's no time like the present. And if we can always put it off and put it off and put it off, but there's no time like now. Challenging reading this morning. I hope that makes some sense to you. Do look